Oh, greetings, class. I thought I'd share some thoughts. I didn't get any questions sent to me, so but I only gave you like a day to ask. So, but I wanted to get some thoughts out to you on some of the stuff that you're reading, and sort of the bigger picture might help you as you move along here. First thing I want you to understand is why are we even bothering with ethics, with studying philosophy? I mean, what's the point, right? And many of you have probably had education to this point that had very little of that kind of learning and that philosophical inquiry. I think I mentioned in the opening that one of I think the travesties of the education system in America was the stripping away of first theology from the classrooms, and then philosophy naturally followed due to the taking away of what in England would be considered a form of philosophy, it's theology. So the fact that we have even graduate students that have never studied philosophy, if you think about it, it's sort of mind-boggling, especially when you look at someone like Plato, for example. And in Book 7 of the Republic, which I'm going to point out, I only have so much required reading in here, but you really need to challenge yourself to go further and find some of these key works. Try to read them, use helps to understand them, but try to engage with the words on the page and use your brain to think. I mean, that's what it means to be a philosopher, and it's something that AI will never be able to replicate, but I can get into that some other time. Anyways, so in Plato's allegory of the cave, he's kind of making a simplistic point, but it really goes to a lot of things that are going on these days in our society. The divisiveness, the inability to communicate with one another from different belief systems. All of these things are related to what I believe is a lack of engagement with philosophy, because they're based in beliefs, right? And so Plato puts this into an allegory, and it's basically a story of these people that are born into a cave, and they're enslaved in this cave. They can't get out of the cave. After a while, I think they don't want to get out of the cave. And the only thing they really know of the outside world is from a little light that filters in, they see reflections of certain things on the walls of the cave. They see a reflection of a rabbit, a reflection of a person, a reflection of a tree. And they come to believe that these reflections are the truth. That, in other words, the image that they see, this reflection on the wall of the cave of the rabbit, they believe that is what a rabbit is. And over some time, somebody escapes from the cave. First, they walk out and they see the sun, and it hits them, and they're almost startled by it. They don't sort of know what to make of it. I hope that's kind of where you're at in your journey at a minimum, is sort of walking into the sun, this new light of something that you might be approaching just from a different way, right? So the person walks out into the light, and they're immediately confused, but they start to see things, and they start to reason things. By the way, in the allegory, the sun is supposed to represent reasoning, right? So they start to reason through these things, and they see a real flower, what a real flower looks like. They see what a real rabbit looks like. They see what real people look like. And this person that leaves the cave tries to, I think out of compassion, really, for his fellow people that he spent the time in the cave with, he goes back into the cave, and he wants to help them. So he starts telling them about the sun, and about the rabbits and the flowers, and the colors and the things that they can't see by these reflections on the wall of the cave. And instead of accepting what he's saying, at first it starts off kind of snarky. They, sort of, it's like they're sarcastic with him, and then that turns into anger, and inevitably they want to kill him. So there's this plot to kill the person that went out and explored, which in Plato's mind is the philosopher, right? So this person who went out and became a philosopher that looked at the world in a different way came back in and wanted to share that with people. And I think he really gets that, the fact that they wanted to kill him really from, if you remember, his teacher was Socrates, and Socrates had been put to death by drinking the hemlock as he went on trial in the Gore in Athens. So you can look all that up. But that allegory is really important, and it's really the reason, it's a good example of sort of why we're here, right? Because we need to start to understand and step back. We've been fed so much in our lives. And if we step back and ask the big questions, why am I here? Think about that one. Why am I here? People thought of that one question their entire lives. They have entire volumes of books they have written on just why I am here, or telos, my purpose, right? Where did I come from? An infinite number of universes? What does infinite mean? And that goes into the next thing, where I just ask myself that question. One of the reasons I push back on the word teaching a little bit is I'm not sure that that's really what I do, or what I'm here to do. I'm really trying to facilitate learning. In other words, I want you to take responsibility for your journey and your intellectual engagement with the literature, and I become sort of a guide in that regard. And so I'm very passionate about that. There's nothing wrong with teaching. It's just sort of a word that I feel like we've lost the other part of it, which is that sort of Socratic interaction, that where I just ask myself a question, well, what do I mean by infinity? I mean, we never stop sometimes and just ask those simple questions. I was at Oxford last year, and I think I used a couple examples to help clarify this. One was I used to teach advanced maths, and one of the sections I used to teach to PhD students was multivariate regression analysis and structural equation modeling. So in multivariate analysis, if you put that equation, there's always a little letter at the end of the equation. It's a small e, and it boggles me how many people, even PhD students, don't know what that little e stands for. But that e stands for error, and that means there's error within the probability. So if you want to call them the hard sciences, they usually have a margin of error of 1%, or that's a confidence interval, and then 5% or 95% of the confidence interval for social sciences. Let's take the social sciences, for example. That 5% is error. So if we take one theory with a 4% error and another theory and a 4% error, we build upon these theories over time. I think what Thomas Kuhn was getting at with his sort of bringing the term paradigm shift into relevance is that it becomes so absurd at some point that the paradigm starts to shift back. And maybe we're getting to that point where the education has become that point to a point where somebody's stepping back and saying, wait a minute, we just sort of missed everything that we're supposed to be doing here, and it just swung back the other way. So I think that's one way of looking at it. Now I also give you John Lennox's take on this, okay? And Lennox's take, I love his analogy with Aunt Matilda's cake, right? So Aunt Matilda makes this cake, and the scientists study it, right? The biologists will tell you how it affects the human body. The chemists can break down the molecules in the cake. The physicists can write an elegant equation to describe the cake. But what can none of those sciences do? They can never tell you why Aunt Matilda made the cake, okay? Much less really how either. So if you start looking at the learning that we have focused on, which what I call is more scientism than anything. You can look that word up, it means something a little bit different. But the focus on scientism sort of has crept into our culture as part of a thing, like people want to use it as, quote, proof. Well, if you go into a PhD, don't ever use the word proof, because people won't take to that very well. Even in mathematics, they've moved away from it. I mean, physics has become essentially the philosophy of the hard sciences. I mean, half of the things that they discuss, like infinite number of universes or bubble universes, or all of these very sort of strategic aspects, really can't be proven. And so to me, it's just philosophy. And having a little bit of a mathematician in me myself, I can say that mathematicians don't tend to make good philosophers. Or maybe they tend to make better philosophers than, say, another hard science, because at least they when you start getting into abstract maths and things like that. I think that's what happened with John Lennox. He realized the limitation of mathematics. Well, if he realized the limitations of mathematics and the other sciences are based in mathematics, you can see how that problem can compound. Now in the social sciences, this is even more difficult. It's one of the reasons why I tell all of you to tread very lightly in some of the theories that you encounter, because some of them are philosophically unsound. Okay, I point this out in my papers with leadership theory, democratic and collective styles of leadership. You can read my 2018 or 19 paper, I think it was, and another one in 21 on leadership as practice, a democratic collective style of leadership. Joe Raylan called me about that paper when the first one came out, and he said, Kirk, he said, I read your paper and I got to tell you, I agree. How do I fix it? I don't know. I don't know how to fix it. But I said, but it's a fundamental flaw, and unfortunately he sort of just kept driving it home. I think a lot of theorists will do that at this point without after acknowledging the flaw, just sort of moving on, if you will. And the flaw in that case, you can, like I said, you can read in the paper. The same thing with psychological theory. I think it's chapter 4 of my 2016 work. I think I talk about positive psychology and humanistic psychology. Several years ago, I was the keynote speaker at the West Virginia Annual Psychology Conference, and I was at the big Marriott, and there's 1,000 people there. And I really don't remember how I was going to start off my lecture, but I knew when I walked in, and I told them, I said, when I came into the conference center, I noticed 3 large tables out front. One table was focused on positive psychology. One table was focused on cognitive and dialectic behavioral therapies, which is a humanistic form of psychology, and one table was focused on the Christian counseling and psychology movement. I said, those 3 tables are why I'm here today. And then I went on for a long lecture. But the point of it is, those tables come from incommensurate moral traditions. Okay, McIntyre discusses this, and you'll have these readings later, but I encourage you to take a look at his work on 3 Bible versions. It's actually utilized in one of the papers that I have recommended reading for the class. But I want you to know this for the class. He gives a really concise, good example of 3 general Western traditions that are incommensurate. There's people that come from what he calls a tradition or Thomistic tradition, which is, you can kind of think of it as a theistic tradition, a Christian tradition. Then there's people that look at things from a relativistic, he calls it a genealogical tradition, sort of what's true for you is true for you, what's true for me is true for me, that kind of mentality, as opposed to sort of the lawgiver mentality of the Thomistic tradition. And then what I think is more akin to scientism, or what he calls encyclopedia. So that's where all truth is derived by essentially supporting it through science. Okay, now I think that's one of the reasons why the social sciences has gone so horribly wrong in so many different directions, because they've relied on probability theories to support problematic theories that now it's just, like I said, beyond. Now I'm hitting AI with the same kind of rationale, because I read a paper that AI was being built off Kantian, which is deontological moral tradition, and they also threw in Hume, and they threw in Locke. That took me a second, but I thought, I said, why would they throw Locke and Hume and Kant together? Well, Kant makes sense, because deontology is probably the most easiest, besides maybe utilitarianism, that's replicable within AI, because it's a logical system. It starts with a principle, right? And then from that principle, his categorical imperative, if you will, that's what he calls it. From his categorical imperative, he builds his entire moral philosophy around that. And so it's a logical structure. It's sort of something that can kind of be programmed in to a system, if you will, right? Hume and Locke, like I said, took me a minute, but one of the things that's interesting about Hume and Locke being included is that everybody knows Hobbes and Locke and Hume. So Locke makes sense to me, because Locke and Hume are not commensurate in their moral thinking. And Locke had a specific ontological reasoning. If you don't know what some of these words are, please look them up. His ontology was that the human enters the world as a clean slate, and then is sort of tarnished by the world or sort of becomes evil or becomes good over time, something like this. Whereas Hobbes, coming from a violent upbringing himself, he had a different view of the world. He wrote the famous work Leviathan, and in there he sort of makes the argument for that man is inherently evil, and we have to deal with that regardless of the fact that what they experience in their life. He's focused on the natural man is naturally evil kind of thinking. Now, if you put all of that together, you put Hume's take on morality, which is a reasoned take, Kant's take, which is a different kind of reasoned take, and the ontology of Locke, it makes sense to me why those things are put into AI. The question that I would ask as a philosopher is, are they commensurate with everyone's moral tradition? The answer to that is no, they're not. That makes them dangerous. It's in our paper from last year that I put on there. We talk about how this is dangerous, how it can even cause self-harm through moral disengagement. Now, that's really important, because when we're looking at this divisiveness and these different aspects of what's going on in the world, we have to consider where this stuff originates, why people aren't talking to each other anymore. I think Plato brings that up when he talks about the person who goes out. He's really talking about the philosopher, right? He goes out, becomes a philosopher, he comes back in, he tries to tell everybody, and what do they want to do? They want to kill him in the end, because they don't like what he has to say, because he doesn't have all the answers either. And it's one of the reasons why I'm a little hesitant to lecture on you. I'm happy to lecture, but I don't want to push my ideas on you. I want you to figure them out on your own, because that's how you do philosophy, okay? And by doing philosophy, Plato says you can not only live a better life, he said it is the way that you can live in eudaimonia, or true happiness, if you will, or human flourishing in some way, probably a better way, human flourishing way it's defined. And then, for the Christian or something like that, you can define that within your own moral tradition and where that purpose comes from. For me, God and the Bible, things like this. For other people, different things. But it's important to get to that kind of start point. So back to Aunt Matilda's cake. If we have to realize the limitations of the areas we're dealing with, and in science there's limitations. Doing philosophy in conjunction with science, I think, is really helpful. In fact, it is called the PhD in something, right? So we have lots of people walking around with doctors of philosophy. I've met many of them that actually never took a formal philosophy class in their entire education. That should be somewhat, I don't know if to say disturbing, or if it should be concerning, or if it's just a light should go off. It's like, well, wait a minute, you have a doctor of philosophy in the humanities or something like that, but you've never taken a philosophy class. This doesn't make any sense. Maybe that's sort of the first question. But you run into people, and you should understand basic things and learn through this class. Go beyond what the readings are. When you run into a logical fallacy and you realize, I'm not really sure what logical fallacies are. I remember an ad hominem attack, an attack on a person. By the way, you can see that every time you turn the news on. These are great. If you just list off the major logical fallacies, you can find it anywhere on the internet. Just kind of look at the definitions of what they are. And go ahead, I do this at undergraduate level. I have them go home, and then I have said, just watch 20 minutes of any news channel. And as you're watching it, write down every logical fallacy that you hear during that time. And they come back to class and it's the same thing every time. Everybody's freaking out. They're like, I can't believe I've been lied to my whole life and everything like that. It's really funny. So I would encourage you to do that just as a sort of a thought experiment. And it's very eye-opening to them. It's kind of like them coming out of the cave. They finally got to see some things they had never seen from that perspective before. They didn't even know they were being lied to, or it's like a lot of philosophers will say, the most dangerous people are very clever people. If you look up what the word clever means, you'll kind of understand what it means by that. Clever doesn't mean good. So those are the kind of things they're shooting at when we discuss those kind of aspects of philosophy. Now, I will say that when we go back to Aunt Matilda's cake, it's not that those aspects of understanding the cake aren't important. They are important. they help us understand the cake better. We may have stood there, we know exactly why Aunt Matilda made the cake. She made it because she made it for her daughter, and it's her daughter's birthday, and she loves her daughter. So she loves her daughter, she made the cake. So we know, maybe we know that because we observed that. But we don't know all of the details that other things like science can provide, like the biologist can tell us. Maybe you shouldn't eat the whole cake at once because it could do this to you, right? The chemist can tell us about those kind of aspects as well. They can describe the cake. What becomes problematic in scientific inquiry is when the scientist tries to explain the cake. And this is really what John Lennox is getting at. He's trying to point out a simple thing, that people don't understand the limitations of the science that they're using. So those are some things that I wanted to encourage you on. I also want to reiterate that the readings are very minimal as far as required readings in this class. The number of classes in this program that I designed are minimal for a reason. Mostly because I don't like charging students a ton of money for things they can learn with just a little bit of guidance. What that means is throughout this program, at least the way it was designed, I can't speak for everything now, but the way it was designed was that this program is meant for you to go forth and engage yourself, not to be led by a faculty member into every corner that you want to engage with, okay? So there's all kinds of readings out there in the history of philosophy. Some of you may gravitate towards one or the other. In my courses, because there's been such a massive shift in thinking, we tend to focus a little bit more on virtue ethics. Now, virtue ethics 20 years ago was not popular. It is now. And I think the reason is important. The reason I think virtue ethics is coming back is because of the failing of other ethical systems, specifically consequentialism, really utilitarianism, the greatest good for the greatest number kind of thinking. There's issues with how they define happiness, for example. Those are the kind of inquiry that you need to do. Happiness is an important word. Whenever you see something like happiness or human flourishing in a paper that somebody wrote, especially from the social sciences, you should know what they mean by happiness, what they mean by flourishing, because it may not actually match up with your own moral tradition. And these things are vitally important. So engage with those kind of things. In this class, I like to guide you towards virtue ethics, and I'm going to give you a couple of key figures in this area. One would be G.E.M. Amscombe. I don't have a lot of readings by her. There's some in your text, but so much more to her thinking on virtue ethics. MacIntyre, Alistair MacIntyre, another one. I always recommend students start with something like, maybe you could actually work backwards. He has a great book for 2016 book, Conflicts in Modernity. It really talks about some of the things I'm talking about. Why is there all this conflict going on? Why is nobody talking anymore? He gets into a lot more than that in his book. Working backwards though, his great book, Dependent Rational Animals. And then the concise version would be Three Rival Versions of Moral Inquiry. He has another book that I hope many of you will go into later on. It's called Whose Justice, Which Rationality? Just think of the title of the book. Whose Justice, Which Rationality? I'm having you read, or in week 1, I had you read about justice, about Plato's idea of justice. Try and see where he struggles in his idea of justice. Try and see where you may disagree. It's okay. You can disagree with Plato. And try to start to form your own thoughts on what you believe justice is by engaging with these other writers throughout the history of ethics that have discussed things like justice, a very overused term these days and used in many different ways than what people, I think that it actually means. I often say one person's justice is another person's injustice, just to sort of make the point of where I'm trying to guide them. So I mentioned G.E.M. Amscombe, very, very important, more current virtue ethicist, Alistair MacIntyre, and there's one other one that's escaping me right now. But I know, Sidgwick, you can look up Henry Sidgwick as well. His is really good because he tries to sort of marry virtue ethics with utilitarianism. I won't tell you what I think. I'll let you see what you think. You can look that stuff up, and remember, watching the videos, there's all kinds of short videos and all this stuff online these days. They can be helpful, but without engaging directly with the literature, I worry that you won't have the same kind of learning engagement. It's that sort of mentality of, maybe what's one of the reasons I'm out here today, besides the fact that it's so windy, but I'm walking on this path because it's sort of like what they would tell us to do as philosophers. You know, I read some things this morning, I come out here, and now I'm thinking about them. It sounds so strange to us. Well, we just actually stop and think. We just actually hold up our lives and ponder things. It's crazy idea. But according to the ancients, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, I hope you'll come to understand what they meant by eudaimonia or eudaimonia, depending on how it's pronounced, and their version of human flourishing and what that means. And for them, the greatest way to flourish as a human is to do philosophy and to live a better life of character. And I think that that's one of the reasons why there's this push back towards virtue ethics, because people are really trying to figure that out because of the failings of these other systems. I will still try to answer questions. If you like this format, if you don't like the format, I don't know if I'm making you dizzy walking around or if I'm just keeping your attention. It's something a podcaster of mine told me about, a friend of mine. So let me know if you like it. If you don't, I can go back to whatever you want. I can stand behind a podium if you want. I just kind of like being out here, and I don't really use slides much anymore. If you want to ask me a question, it's almost better to do it that way because I'm just kind of really hitting some big topics right now. But keep going, don't give up. I say this to a lot of students about how to get started and stuff like this. Watch the crash course videos, just don't rely on them. Try to go to the main texts and try to understand them, struggle with them, but then go to Barnes and Nobles or whatever and get get Philosophy for Dummies and Philosophy for Idiots. I had them all. I mean, whatever the $5 philosophy books, and then it just starts getting that history in your head, the movement of from the ancients towards the Christian tradition into the reason tradition into the Enlightenment, and you can sort of walk all the way right into postmodernism, where we sort of found ourselves. And I think there's a lot of people that think we're kind of coming out of that now, because as I say, the failing of those philosophies really were a part of postmodernism, right? So there's a lot of postmodern theory that you're getting in other classes, and just understand that there are probably philosophical problems with those theories. It doesn't mean you can't use them. It means you should understand the problems with those theories before you use them, because you may use them in the wrong way, and that is not good for a researcher to do. So knowing the limitations, I think, sometimes is half the battle. And hopefully this is helpful. Reach out and send me a note, send me an email. Don't forget, I tried to put some office hours on there in one of my announcements. Those are good times for me. If they're not good times for you, I'll make time. You just have to get a hold of me, keep contact with me. Don't slide back in this course. Keep going forward and reach out, and I'll help you as best I can. Have a great day.